Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on another edition of Building Smart Energy Efficiency Essentials for Modern Homes. Following up from last week, we have part two on the Department of Energy was Zero Energy Ready Homes Program. Now it's just called the DOE Efficient Homes Program. Still the same program. As always, we're going to give it a minute for people to arrive. So just hold tight and we will get going here in a second. Thank you. Okay, all right. I think we're ready to go here. Thanks again for your patience while we allowed some additional participants to arrive. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. I'm Chris McTaggart, and I will be your presenter. I've been doing a lot of these sessions throughout the last several months, and we're getting down to the home stretch, but excited to follow up from last week where we talked about the Department of Energy Efficient Homes Program and the building enclosure and mechanical and hot water provisions of that program. We're going to be following up with part two today, which is on the electrification readiness as well as renewable readiness components of the DOE program. Thank you again, of course, to our sponsors for this series, DTE and Consumers Energy. Couldn't have done it without them, and looking forward to continuing here for the rest of the tenure. Chris McTaggart, I'm your presenter, have been for a lot of these sessions throughout the last several months. I'm a Michigan born and bred guy and raising my family here in the state of Michigan. I have a lot of experience all throughout the state in terms of what's going on in the built environment. And I'm extremely passionate about ways that we can level up our game here in the state because we need it. You know, we're one of the more energy intensive states, especially when it comes to homes, largely because we have a legacy building stock that is less efficient. And we have, costs, of living are going up for everybody. So, efficient homes make a lot of sense. They keep people comfortable. They give people a better quality of life and they can help their bills be more moderate. So, as we get going in today's presentation, I just want to remind you all that there was a little bit of a shell game that's been played here by the Department of Energy. The program that has been known as the Zero Energy Ready Homes Program now since about 2014, I believe, is now called the DOE Efficient New Homes Program. It is the same program for all intents and purposes. There were a couple of minor programmatic modifications, but for whatever reason, the DOE leadership no longer wanted to promote the program as being a zero energy ready program. So it is a more generic, efficient home program. Okay, well, you might have thought that they would have gotten rid of all the stuff related to electrification and renewables, but they didn't. It's really the same. So just know if I say ZERH or Zero Energy Ready Homes, I am referring to the DOE program. I think that ZERH, it rolls off the tip of the tongue maybe a little bit more, makes it sound a little bit more exotic and a little bit more sexy. It's actually got kind of a cool logo. Not a big fan of the sort of generic icon looking logo that they're rolling with right now, but maybe they'll get better over time. Let's see. Anyways, so again, you might hear us refer to it as ZERH, just know we're referring to the DOE Efficient Homes Program. So what we're going to be doing today is kind of it's all the other stuff associated with zero energy ready homes. Last week, we focused on the building enclosure, mechanical system, and hot water distribution requirements associated with the DOE program. That's a big part of what makes it special. Is it's going even one step further on the continuity of energy efficiency by having a better building enclosure that meets modern energy code standards like the 2021 and 2024 IECC, requires good, thoughtful heating and cooling distribution where we're keeping our ducts and air handlers inside conditioned space. And it requires thoughtful approach to hot water, whether or not it's a more compact, low volume plumbing distribution system or simply incorporating a more efficient water heater with a moderate compactness level of hot water distribution. So those are the things we discussed last week. Today, we're going to be talking about the other elements that make the DOE program special. So there are some lighting and appliance elements. There is an indoor air quality element of the program. And then there's renewable readiness, EV readiness, and heat pump readiness provisions that we will generically refer to as electrification readiness provisions. Okay, so just so if you missed it last week, what is this program? So it was developed by the DOE in order to give an incentive for builders to go beyond Energy Star. As you all probably have learned, if you've been in previous sessions in this series, Energy Star intends to be about 10 to 15% more efficient than the model energy code. And so for the DOE program, there is an opportunity to go even a little bit further to recognize builders who are willing to take that leap. Part of the programmatic value proposition with zero energy ready homes was that once you make homes efficient to a certain level, then at that point, really, you're ready to add solar panels. And so let's go ahead and make them renewable ready homes by setting up the home with appropriate roof area that is sized and sort of structurally sound to add solar panels, as well as appropriate conduit run so that those on-site power production systems could be more easily added to homes at some point in the time in the future. Again, those provisions still remain, despite the fact that it's no longer called Zero Energy Ready Homes, but rather the DOE Efficient Homes Program. I will say I have a degree of empathy for the DOE in this because the truth is that zero energy ready homes may or may not have been a totally appropriate value sell for every climate. Take here in Michigan, just simply being a minimum compliant DOE zero energy ready homes in terms of the ERI score and the other programmatic elements didn't necessarily mean that you could just add solar panels and get to net zero. You'd probably get pretty close, but not every house would never necessarily get you there. Also, the program does allow for fuel-fired appliances like gas furnaces and boilers, or gas or propane water heaters and cooking as well. So in some ways, zero energy ready homes, certainly I think we can say it's a nicer looking logo and it sounds more exotic. I don't necessarily disagree that the label was not always entirely consistent. If you built the same house down in Arizona, you're probably ready to be zero energy. Why? Because they get a lot of sun, and so it's a lot easier to throw solar panels on top of the home. They also have relatively moderate heating loads, and so it's a lot easier down in a place like Arizona or even Colorado to potentially get to net zero following this program. Anyways, regardless, history of the program started all the way back in the aughts in 2008. Again, an opportunity when Energy Star version 2 was very popular. The Builders Challenge program gave an opportunity for builders to be recognized for advanced building science practices, When version 3 of Energy Star was released, the DOE rebranded the program to the DOE Challenge Home, and then 2 years later rebranded it to the Zero Energy Ready Home. Why? Well, again, I don't know that builders want a challenge per se. I think that they want to be recognized for building an advanced home. And so there's somewhat of a marketing appeal here to modify the program name. In 2022, the program went into its version 2 program, which was an advanced specification that really leveled up the program to be even more stringent than version 1. And as you learned here in September 2025, it is now called the DOE Efficient New Homes Program. So regardless, the program is available for all building sizes. There is a single family program as well as a multifamily program, and it follows basically the same logic as the Energy Star decision tree. So attached and detached single family homes, as well as townhomes and side-by-side duplexes count under the single family program. Versus if you get into apartment buildings or stacked townhome type of configurations, then you get into the multifamily program. The Consumers Energy has actually had an incentive for Zero Energy Ready homes this year through a pilot. You had to have already requested to participate, and you have to finish by the end of the year. So if you're just now learning about it, I don't think it's going to work for you, unfortunately. However, there is still a federal tax credit available through the 45L for homes that finish as of the end of June 2026. Here's some more information about that 45L tax credit. $5,000 for earning Zero Energy Ready homes version 2 if you're able to wrap up by the end of June. The key elements of the program are a better building enclosure. So Energy Star allows for some trade-offs. If you've participated in previous sessions, Energy Star wants us to have a good building enclosure, but it does allow for some modest reductions in the building enclosure insulation values in order to accommodate design choices by home builders. Whereas Zero Energy Ready homes doesn't allow as many trade-offs. You have to have either a 2021 or 2024 compliant building enclosure in order to work within the DOE program. There's also some more specific higher performance fenestration requirements that are layered into the program. Efficient water heating design, keeping ducts for heating and cooling within conditioned space. Those are all those things that we talked about last week, right? And then there are some lights and appliance provisions, as well as electrification readiness provisions, and improved indoor air quality through certification under the EPA's Indoor Air Plus program. So it's those last 4 bullets that we're going to be focused on today. The program has mandatory requirements, which are the checklist elements that have to be met. So, for example, you have to have Energy Star appliances. It's not an option not to. You have to be set up to be PV ready. It's not an option not to, because those are what are called mandatory requirements. And then there are basically the ability to demonstrate compliance using performance methodologies focused on the Energy Rating Index score, aka the HERS Index score. And all of these elements are verified by program verifiers, and that's what gives us certification. It's important to note, as we talked about last week, that to be a DOE compliant home, you have to also be compliant with the Energy Star homes program, as well as EPA's Indoor Air Plus. So really, by being a DOE efficient home, you are the combination of all 3 of those badges. So again, this is just another way to look at the value proposition. We optimize efficiency first with better building enclosure, more focused HVAC equipment and water heating equipment, and really good quality lighting and appliances. So that optimizes our efficiency. Basically, at that point, it's hard to do a whole lot better in terms of saving energy. The Indoor Air Plus program has some specific water management requirements as well as indoor air quality elements. The program overall builds in more optimized comfort because of some of the equipment and envelope specifications. And then, basically we're setting up the homes to be future ready because they are able to accommodate solar panels at some point in the future. They are able to accommodate electric vehicles at some point in the future. And if using fuel fired water heating or heating equipment, basically we're setting up the home to be heat pump ready as well. So, this is all to say that the program doesn't specify one particular fuel. It's not like Energy Star Next Gen, which literally requires the home to be all electric. But it does, set us up for a future where that may make sense. So, talking about some of this sort of what should we expect in terms of compliance, most likely the scores for zero energy ready homes are going to be in the 40s, so mid to high 40s. So that's a pretty efficient home compared to standard for sure. And then, there is a checklist that has to be completed in order to document the program compliance. All this is going to be performed by the programmatic verifier, typically a resident home energy rater with specific training in order to be able to deliver on this. So let's jump into the heart of today's presentation, which is going over those other additional elements of the program specific to lighting, appliances, and indoor air quality. Okay, so first and foremost, lighting. This is kind of an easy one. The home has to be LED lighting throughout, basically 100%. There is an exception for lighting inside of appliances. So, that's good to know. If you open up your refrigerator and it's got an incandescent bulb, you're not disqualified. That's great. Although most Energy Star appliances are going to have LED lighting as well. But regardless, if we're looking at the lighting, here's the deal. This is probably more straightforward than ever before. LEDs have become the market standard for lighting. They're not necessarily something that particularly jumps off the page as a premium any longer in the marketplace. This is a big difference from when I joined this industry back 16 years ago. 16 years ago, it was a battle to get anybody to put CFL lighting in. And now, not only CFLs are they're a thing of the past, but LEDs are just ubiquitous. And so this really isn't a big issue. I do like the fact that they build in a small allowance for task or decorative lighting because, sometimes it may make sense to allow for a specific fixture. Say somebody's got, a chandelier with Edison bulbs and they're not LED, but they are incandescents. Well, that's okay because it's decorative in nature. But the point is that pretty much all the lighting that people are using on a day-to-day basis is LED, so that they're getting the value of energy efficiency through their lighting kind of by standard. I think this makes a lot of sense. Again, I appreciate the decorative lighting allowance because I myself have pretty much LEDs throughout my house, except I have a couple of fixtures that happen to come with Edison style incandescent bulbs, and I just chose to install them because they looked kind of nice. And so I made that minor sacrifice. Energy Star certified appliances. Okay, so this is important. Energy Star appliances are only required where installed by the builder. So a lot of production home builders are not necessarily including the appliance package as part of the home upon purchase. Obviously, every builder does things a little bit different. I know a lot of builders will put in the dishwasher as a standard, but maybe the stove, but perhaps not the refrigerator or laundry equipment. It really depends on your market. It depends on your builder. There's nothing that requires that a home has to be sold with appliances included, but where they are included by the home builder, they have to be Energy Star labeled appliances. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Why would we not? Energy Star appliances work. They deliver savings for consumers, and if we're going to expend the effort to have an energy efficient home, we might as well have Energy Star appliances. Another one that is a little bit maybe different that you wouldn't expect is that all bath fans have to be Energy Star as well. And this is even for bath fans that are not a part of our whole house mechanical ventilation system. So this is important because under Energy Star certified homes, bath fans have to be Energy Star labeled if they are part of the whole house ventilation system. But under Zero Energy Ready Homes, or rather the DOE program, it's all bath fans. So anywhere you have bath ventilation fans, they have to be Energy Star. Why is this? Why would anybody care about adding in efficient ventilation? Well, number one, they're a lot quieter. So people are more inclined to use their ventilation systems if they are quiet. When bath fans are loud, it is kind of obnoxious and it discourages people from wanting to turn them on. I myself have a young child in the house, and so I would be remiss to, while they're sleeping, turn on a bath fan that is just sort of a builder grade low efficiency fan while the baby's sleeping, because it's probably going to wake them up. They're so loud, they rattle and shake, and they're wheezy and noisy. And I myself hate mechanical noise like that. And so I think this makes a lot of sense. The other value of an Energy Star bath fan is that they run obviously with low energy, but they also help to fight poor installation in order to better deliver the CFM that they were rated for. So there's a lot of value to Energy Star bath fans, but I'll just say if you're going from, say, Energy Star certified homes to a DOE program, this could catch people by surprise, because I wouldn't say that Energy Star bath fans are an ultra premium ad, but if you're dealing with production home builders where every dollar counts, having to improve the quality of their standard bath fans throughout the whole house is not something that they may necessarily expect. And I could see this one getting overlooked. Indoor air quality. So speaking of bath fans, obviously bath fans are used for a couple different things. They help to reduce moisture in our homes. They can also be used as a whole house ventilation system to bring in outdoor fresh air. They can also help to remove odors from the house. So bath fans are part of an air quality solution, but they're not the whole thing. And even whole house ventilation or local mechanical exhaust, those are not by themselves adequate for ensuring good indoor air quality. This is why the EPA created the Indoor Air Plus program, which is an additional badge that can be added onto Energy Star homes, but is a mandatory element of Zero Energy Ready homes. In order to be Zero Energy Ready homes, or the DOE program rather, you have to certify to EPA's Indoor Air Plus. There is 2 concurrent programs right now. You can certify to version 1, or you can certify to version 2. And so this graph is a little bit strange because previously ZERH was going to kick in mandatory compliance with Indoor Air Plus version 2 as of January 1st of 2026. But in the programmatic changeover to the Efficient Homes program, they kicked the ball down the field for one more year. So basically, the allowance to use version 2 has basically been kicked into 2027. Basically, 2027, you got to use version 2. Version 1 can still be used basically until then. So this is a little bit strange in how it's depicted, but that's the idea. We are going to go over some of the kind of the basics of Indoor Air Plus, although we, following up in the next week, do have a specific lesson webinar directly on Indoor Air Plus, where we get into all the nitty-gritty details. But here's the broad view of Indoor Air Plus. It's a voluntary program, number one, so it's kind of like Energy Star or Zero Energy Ready Homes. You don't have to do it, but builders can choose to specify doing an Indoor Air Plus to improve the air quality of a home. If you're doing the DOE program, it is mandatory. Let's start with sort of the broad requirements. So we want a dry home. Why do we want a dry home? Well, because moist homes promote mold potentially inside the home, decay of building materials, and the risk of mold or condensation. So there are more specific requirements in Indoor Air Plus as it pertains to things like how to create drainage planes and flashing for things like roofs and walls. And then there are some specific details on how to treat foundations that are above and beyond Energy Star. For those who've been in the game for a while, Energy Star version 3 used to require some specifics when it came to water management. That's no longer the case. They eliminated the water management requirements of the program with revision 14 of Energy Star, but I would say that most of the value proposition was maintained if implementing Indoor Air Plus. So some of these devil in the details specifics about how to keep moisture, bulk water out of the house are now included, or continue to be included rather within Indoor Air Plus. After we ensure that we have a dry home, we want to make sure that we are not creating a significant pollution issue in the home with radon. So radon is an atmospheric, or rather, excuse me, it's a soil gas. It is also in the atmosphere, but it's a soil gas that can get into the home through foundations, and in high enough concentrations can actually cause lung cancer. So there are specific radon mitigation measures that are specified as part of Indoor Air Plus. We also have requirements for combustion safety, further, specifying ways to reduce the risk of combustion byproducts entering the home and causing air quality effects. We have pest barriers to make sure that any openings on the outside of the home don't allow for rodents or insects to make themselves into the home. There are some more additional specifics when it comes to ventilation and filtration that go above and beyond the Energy Star program. And then finally, there are some specifics that deal with the actual materials that go into the home. So building materials can be a source of air quality issues. They can introduce what are called volatile organic compounds. So things like pressed or manufactured wood products, or paints, or finishes, carpet and carpet pads, or other type of engineered floor systems. All of these can potentially cause air quality issues. So there are some specifics that come out of Indoor Air Plus related to ensuring basically that we're not adding bad stuff into the house that's going to cause people to have an allergic reaction. So, again, Indoor Air Plus how do we prevent respiratory issues? Well, there's really kind of two main things that can cause respiratory issues when it comes to the built environment and people living in homes: biological elements and then chemical elements. So, biological elements, again, would be like if we had a wet house, or a house that didn't have good ventilation. That could be an issue. Or if we had pests getting into the home. Um, versus chemical agents are more about, again, those volatile organic compound type of issues that can cause health reactions. So if you're in a cold climate, similar to zero energy ready homes, basically you have to have an ERV or an HRV. Personally, I think we should be moving to balanced ventilation throughout the country, or at least in most climate zones. Um, Climate zone 4 and above, I think there's value to heat recovery ventilation. Lower than that, if you're in climate zone 3, 2, 1, it's questionable whether or not the amount of BTUs saved necessarily make it that important. But in general, just having balanced ventilation means that we're not pushing moisture into our building enclosures. So there's some value there. Regardless, Michigan, we basically have climate zone 5, 6, and 7. So anything north of Clare, once you're getting up north there, you're going to have to put in a ERV or HRV. Again, if you feel like that was too broad and non-specific of a review of the indoor air quality provisions of the EPA's Indoor Air Plus program, don't worry. We're going to be going over it more in detail next week so that you get really a big picture, especially diving in the details of what makes version 1 different from version 2. Okay, so getting into the next component here of the program, zero energy ready homes no longer. Now the DOE efficient homes program still has renewable ready provisions. Believe it or not, when I got that email from the DOE, I sure as heck figured that any reference to renewables would have been taken out of the program, but that is not the case. The program still has renewable ready provisions. So what does renewable ready mean? Does it mean that you have to put solar on the building? No, it doesn't. So this is a big thing that I think people have gotten wrong about the program, and maybe why the DOE has chosen to rebrand is that it's a little bit confusing. Consumers don't know the difference between zero ready versus net zero. And I've heard a lot of builders and architects and even homeowners say, yeah, I want to do that DOE program because I'm going to get net zero out of it. I'm like, well, pump the brakes. You're not necessarily going to get all the way to zero just by being a zero energy ready home. And even if you are, you're still not going to get there. Even if you added solar, I think this might be part of the motivation with the DOE changing the brand name because, as it is, if you have a minimally compliant DOE home in Michigan, you can't necessarily just add solar panels and be good to go. But solar is the next step, and I appreciate the DOE has maintained this in the program. I think that they deserve a lot of credit because the idea here is by being solar ready, you don't have to put the panels on the roof. That's not required by the builder. But what is required is everything else that you'd want to do to set up the property so eventually you could do it. So ideally, the home is properly oriented, and ideally, the roof is not excessively shaded. Look, to a certain extent, some of these things you can't avoid. If you're going to build a house in the middle of a forest, then guess what? There's not a whole lot of value to adding conduit and bracing and things like that for solar panels. Why? Because if you're in the middle of a forest, you're not going to get any sun on your roof. And so there's no value to setting up the home to add solar. Similarly, if let's say you're in an urban environment, you're in Detroit or Grand Rapids, and you have a single family house that's right next to a multifamily building, and that multifamily building is totally shading the roof. Again, there's no value to setting up the property to be able to accommodate solar panels because you're not going to get any electrical generation out of that roof. So the DOE program recognizes this. So there is a decision tree about whether or not there's an adequate amount of roof area facing south, because we have the sun in the southern horizon here in the northern hemisphere. So ideally, you'd want somewhere within 180-degree spectrum of south in order to add solar panels. And you want at least a few hundred square feet of them, or it just may not be worth doing it. And so the program recognizes that. But ideally, you are able to design the home so it is able to accommodate this. Personally, I think that this is something that every designer, every architect should be doing on every single home. Let's set up the home with different roof configurations so they can easily accommodate solar panels that will work. Wouldn't that be nice? Regardless, evaluating the home's orientation and the pitch. So is there any room for solar? If so, make sure that the roof is properly braced so as to add the dead load capacity of the panels themselves. Make sure that there is a conduit that's installed that runs up to that roof, and that there is a specific, in the electrical room, we set up room for an inverter to be installed, as well as a specific bypass in the electrical panel specific to a solar setup. So that's what being renewable ready means. It doesn't mean that you're adding renewable energy necessarily. You certainly could. If you do, you're good to go too. If your home has solar on it, you have become compliant with the Zero Energy Ready Homes DOE programmatic requirements, but you don't have to actually add the panels. You just have to make it renewable ready. So again, why would we do any of this? Why would we set up homes to accommodate this? Well, because once you have a home that is so efficient, there's a certain breaking point where you can't add much more insulation. You can't make it that much more airtight to really derive a lot of value. At least that's DOE's perspective. In a couple more weeks, we're going to talk about the Passive House program, and Passive House thinks a little bit differently. They think that there's still more juice to squeeze out of the lemon. But regardless, you get to a certain point of home efficiency, and the home's never going to be any better than that. The only next measure is to add on-site renewable power so that you can basically have the homeowner provide some of their own on-site renewable power to offset their energy bills. Makes a lot of sense. Solar panels aren't the only way to do renewable energy, but certainly they're the most popular way. Typically, they're done on a rooftop. They could be done on a ground-mounted configuration as well. It converts DC power to alternating current using an inverter system. And you can actually connect them to batteries too, so that the homeowner potentially has backup storage in case the power goes out, or if they want to take advantage of storing the energy on site so that when the sun goes down, they can continue to use it. There's also opportunities for potentially on-demand pricing through the utility that can really help to save more energy over time. Again, we talked about it back several weeks ago, but you can have a roof-mounted versus a ground-mounted system. I'd say most suburban developments, it's going to be pretty hard to get a really good ground-mounted system, just because most people don't have enough land in order to devote to ground-mounted applications. So I'd say the most common way that people go about adding solar panels in residential is using roof-mounted types of systems. So going through this checklist, remember there was things that I talked about where, you have to be within a certain amount of due south, to be considered for this. If you're not, then it doesn't necessarily make sense. So there's about 160-degree window here that they're considering, that would allow you to be, of true north. So more or less, you have a pretty good south-facing exposure, and then you're going to figure out what the azimuth is. So that's sort of the line of the horizon of where the sun is going to be. for that array, as well as what your incline is going to be. You want to provide what that load is going to be. So, if you're doing a ground mount system, it doesn't matter. Basically, we're not worried about adding more weight to the roof. But if you're adding, solar panels don't weigh all that much, but they weigh something, and so we have to make sure that there is adequate support on a roof for that. Then we have to have in our drawings, the specific renewable ready features that are to be installed, as well as a potential future array that could be installed. And then you have a conduit that is field verified to have been installed up to the roof, as well as a space in the electrical panel for a future solar system to be installed. So, again, we want to make sure that there is enough consideration for the extra weight of the solar. We want to figure out where that's located and what its orientation and inclination is. We want to verify that conduit is running from the electrical panel up to the roof. And then we want to make sure that there is a circuit breaker dedicated to a future solar system. So none of these things are necessarily standard, right? They're also not very expensive. It's not very expensive to set up a home to be renewable ready. It's more about thought that has to go into it. We mentioned that there are some exceptions. So one exception we didn't talk about is what happens if the building or community already has PV. So let's say that you're building houses in a subdivision and there's already a master community renewable system. That happens, like particularly in DTE territory. Ann Arbor has a couple of solar powered communities where they have whole community solar panel arrays. Well, in that case, you don't have to worry about setting up the house to be PV ready. Again, I talked about my example of where you are in an urban environment and totally shaded by the adjacent building, or you're in the woods and you're totally shaded. So again, sometimes certain homes, they're just not going to be worth doing. If you have a lack of 500 square foot of roof area in a way that's going to allow you to add solar panels that make sense, then they're not going to make you have to do it. So you have a diagram here that shows you, if you have east and west and you can add 500 panels there, that's okay. If you've got northwest southeast orientation, that could work. Northeast southwest, that could work. North and south, that could work. But again, it all comes down to the amount of square footage of area. So if for whatever reason you don't have enough square footage in those areas, between those degrees of horizon, then ultimately you're not going to be required to do it. Okay, so that was solar readiness. And I would say that, again, that was probably the biggest value proposition, especially when they changed the name to Zero Energy Ready Homes, was we're going to set up homes so they can, in the future, accommodate on-site power and become net zero homes. Again, whether or not that's the reality, I think is up for debate. It isn't necessarily going to give you enough, let's just say 500 square foot area of panels. Panels are roughly about 20 square feet. So we're talking about 25 panels. And let's just say, they're about 350 watts per panel. So that's 25 panels times 350 watts. That gives you an 8.5 kW nominal system. That's pretty good, actually. But is that enough to make every home net zero? Not necessarily. If you have a very large home, probably not. Even if it's an efficient home, that's still probably not enough necessarily. Now, that's not to say that that's the limit. You could add, if you have 1,000 square foot roof area, you could add double that amount of size of panels possibly. Regardless, the point is that we're giving people the provision to offset their bills further at some point in the future using on-site renewable power. That's the point. EV readiness. So, as you all are probably aware, electric vehicles are now more prominent in terms of a selection for consumers. And so we would like to give people the opportunity to charge at home. That's one of the value propositions of EVs, is that you don't have to go to the gas station. You can just charge your vehicle at home, and that whole part of your life, you never even have to think about it anymore. So again, you don't have to install an EV car charger. That is not required. What you do have to do is you have to, assuming that there's at least a parking space or a dedicated garage, if you don't have either of those things, then you have to comply with the ZERH multifamily provisions if there's shared parking. If for whatever reason there's like zero parking, well, that's a whole other thing, and I guess you don't have to follow these requirements, right? Especially here in Michigan. I'm here in Detroit, Motor City. Guess what? We like to drive, so most people are going to have at least a parking spot in their driveway, or a dedicated parking spot for them, or if not, a garage itself. You have to have a 240 volt, 30 amp receptacle within 6 feet of the driveway or in the garage. And then you have to have a branch in the panel for EV charging. So again, ZERH or the DOE program, it doesn't require us to have on-site renewable power. It doesn't require us to put in EV car chargers, but it does require that the home is set up for that in the future. And you may be saying, I'm skeptical about EVs. I don't think that they're ever really going to happen. Look, we don't know what the future is. And there's a good chance that the technology will continue to improve and it becomes a no-brainer. And in 10 years from now, everybody is driving an EV because it's just very cost and life efficient for us. We'll see what ends up happening, but the requirement of the program is set up a place in the panel for an extra 240 volt run, as well as sending a receptacle to a place where someone can charge. Heat pump readiness. Okay, so again, does ZERH require us to have heat pumps? The answer is no. It does not require electrification. You can, in fact, install a fuel-fired furnace or boiler or a fuel-fired water heater. There's no prohibition within the Zero Energy Ready Homes, now the DOE Efficient Homes program, for fuel-fired heating, water heating, cooking, clothes dryers, none of it. There's no prohibition for any of those elements. You can, in fact, use fuels for any of those things and still be certified. But you have to set up the home for a future where heat pumps may make more sense. So for heat pump water heater readiness, you have to have an individual branch circuit within 3 feet of the water heater. And there has to be space within the home or garage that is a certain size, or within 3 feet of a fossil fuel water heater for the future application of a heat pump water heater. What's the logic here? Well, the logic here is heat pump water heaters continue to get more efficient. And so at a certain point, it's going to be a no-brainer for people to install them. But how you install them is important, especially in a cold climate. They can potentially chill a room in excess, and potentially cause condensation potential issues. So that's why they're specifying a specific kind of space that a heat pump water heater can be installed. You can't just put it in a tiny little closet, that is exactly big enough for the water heater to fit in. It's just not going to work. So you have to set this up for in the future, a location where something like this may make sense. In our climate, probably not the garage. You may be thinking, why would anybody put their water heater in the garage? Well, in Michigan, you probably wouldn't. Why? Because our garages are very cold in wintertime, and that really doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you were down south in, Alabama, sure, it might make sense to put your water heater in the garage because it really doesn't get that cold. And heat pump water heaters take out hot, humid air from inside the home, and they're actually kind of like a form of an air conditioner. They actually will reduce moisture within a zone, as well as provide a little bit of free cooling. So it makes sense to potentially put something like a heat pump water heater in a garage in a location like that. Less so in Michigan. For space heating, again, you have to have an individual branch circuit or conduit installed for the future wiring installation of a heat pump. All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory on why this is kind of a nothing burger requirement. So almost every home today in Michigan has air conditioning installed, or at least the provision for air conditioning to be installed. Those require a 240-volt circuit. A heat pump also requires a 240-volt circuit. Heat pumps are air conditioners, or rather, air conditioners are heat pumps. It just happens to be that sometimes people actually refer to air conditioners or heat pumps rather, as two-way ACs. They run in heating mode and in cooling mode. So this is kind of a silly requirement because almost every single home already has AC. So you could just say, put the circuit that is for AC, and you could put in parentheses for future heat pump. And that would be setting it up to be compliant with the program. So even if you have a gas furnace with an air conditioner, like probably 80% of homes in Michigan, you're already heat pump ready, basically. You could be adding a heat pump today. You could be having a dual fuel heat pump today with a new build just by adding a heat pump compressor on the outside of the home, as well as a coil that's set up for it. And you could have a heat pump today while still having backup heat from a propane or gas-fired furnace. Where I guess this wouldn't work out so well would be if you had a boiler. If you had a fuel-fired boiler for space heat and no air conditioning, then technically you would have to still add a provision for a future heat pump. I think that's a pretty rare example. Perhaps some places up north still might do something like that, but I think most people want the provision for air conditioning at this point. Okay, ended a few minutes early. We got through all those additional supplemental requirements and really learned that those additional requirements are pretty straightforward. They don't add a lot of cost. We have LED lighting and Energy Star appliances, not a big deal. We got that. The Energy Star bath fans, that's a little bit of a premium. That's not necessarily something that's standard. Indoor Air Plus, I would say, doesn't add a lot of cost to it, but what it does is it adds a lot of value. And I'm excited next week to be able to go over the value proposition of Indoor Air Plus more in detail. And then besides that, there's a lot of readiness provisions, heat pump readiness. Again, that's kind of a nothing burger. PV readiness, that's a little bit more to consider. EV readiness, again, it's an extra outlet. I'm not, there's a chance that the builder has to consider upsizing their panel for some of these extra circuits. And I would say that's maybe where the cost comes in. But you're also giving a person a future ready home, and that adds a lot of value. The homeowner could in the future choose to add a heat pump. They could choose to add a heat pump water heater. They could choose to add EV charging, and they could choose to add on-site renewable power. I think that adds a lot of value of future readiness. So thanks to everybody who joined. Nick, good seeing you. Thanks for joining again on another week's episode of this series, and we look forward to talking to you again next week on EPA's Indoor Air Plus. Have a good rest of your day.